Thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this conference. I've learned a lot yesterday and this morning so far. I have thought a lot and researched patterns of consumption as well as savings at retirement, and I did so with one of my dear co-authors, Anna Olafsson, so I want to give her a little bit of credit for the work that I'm going to show you. Now, we learned this yesterday already. A few people mentioned it. We have substantial demographic changes. The older population is getting older and older, more and more, and larger. And the preparation for retirement has been shifted, or the responsibility for it has been shifted to individuals more so than the government. Now, at the same time, we have a few papers that show that some people appear to be unprepared for retirement at the time of retirement, so they have very little savings and sometimes even substantial amounts of consumer debt, such as credit card debt. Now, the overall question here that we as researchers want to understand in order to make the world a better place is whether or not people plan properly and save enough for retirement, or whether we have to help them do so. And now there's a very large literature that looked at consumption because, as Suzanne said, consumption makes people happy, so that's what economists look at, that look at consumption around retirement. And there have a few studies found, and this already started in the, I think in the 90s was the first paper, that consumption drops at retirement. So people consume less after retirement than before retirement. And this was called the retirement consumption puzzle, because in principle, we sort of would expect that people know their income is going to fall, so they save more before the fall in income and therefore have some savings to consume more after retirement. But then there was a few papers coming out a little bit more recently, and my distinguished fellow presenter, Suzanne, was also contributing to this literature that said, no, it's not actually happiness that drops at retirement, but it is work-related expenses. So people just don't need to buy as many clothes, et cetera, when they after retirement because they are not working anymore. And then, somewhat relatedly, that was not the only sort of retirement puzzle that is out there, but there was also a literature that showed that wealth does not seem to decumulate as fast as we would expect. So people seem to be concerned, like hold on to their wealth, and the dominant explanation for this is that people are worried about late in life expenses or medical health risk. Now, so what we did is we took a 10 years ago sort of newer data sets, now they become more and more common, which is transactions level bank account data. And here, one row in the data is basically like, some individual made a close transactions of $60, say, on a certain day. So we know all the transactions in people's bank accounts as well as their balances, and sometimes even more information such as demographic information or the interest rates they pay, et cetera, et cetera. Now, here we use data from Iceland, so now also in the US, transactions level data is more common, but back when we did most of this research, we used Icelandic data, and Icelandic data actually has some advantages in this context because it's such a small country, everybody lives in the same small town, so we know exactly what is a bakery versus what is a fine dining establishment, right? There are only 3 banks in Iceland, so people link their accounts through the data, the financial aggregation app that we have, but there are not 20 banks and credit cards, but only 3. So we observe people's whole financial picture. So we use transactions data. We initially looked at consumption around retirement, but then we felt like, well, who are we to tell whether, say, when spending in fine dining establishments goes down, it may be work-related, it may not work-related. So instead we said, well, maybe we should look at other positions on household balance sheets. And then we decided to look at consumer debt and liquid savings, basically how much money people have in their bank accounts. And here there was sort of a small literature out there, some people looking at portfolio choice, some sort of looking at financial mistakes, but there was not much out there when we were writing this paper. So now we just look here at some summary statistics. So when people retire, then of course their pension income goes up, right? This is what we see here. And then we looked at sort of measures of their financial standing or bank accounts. So in here we looked at like how likely they are to have an overdraft. Now in Iceland, people don't have credit card debt as much, but overdraft is sort of the main form of unsecured consumer debt. And half of the people in Iceland have overdrafts at any given time. Now we can see here that the retired population actually has less overdrafts and also less big overdrafts as measured by interest payments. And they have more liquid savings, like more cash in their bank accounts. And now this, could in principle simply be explained like, yeah, if you have enough money to retire, then you retire. So what we actually want to do is sort of look at like one individual and how does their overdrafts or liquid savings change when they transition from before retirement to after retirement. And here what we found is that people tend to repay their overdrafts after they retire, and they tend to increase their liquid savings after they retire. And, this happens pretty immediate around the time of retirement. So here we break it down, first year, second year, third year after retirement. So there's an immediate reduction in the likelihood and amount of overdrafts, and an immediate increase in the amount of cash people have in their checking and savings account. So then we were like, that's a little bit strange because people's income drops at retirement, right? Their pension income is less than their salary they had before retirement. And in principle, we would think that people have more savings before retirement when their income is high and not after retirement. And the same with overdrafts. So if you think about it in a different way now, say work-related expenses drop, and maybe that's why liquid savings goes up. But if I can save money by retiring, then I should, in principle, just retire early, right? If the work-related expenses are so large that they make up the differential in income. But that is not what we see in Iceland. People work longer than the retirement ages, and the additional pension income they get from working longer is way too small to explain kind of the large increase in savings and reduction in overdraft debts that we see. Now, then we were thinking very carefully about what might explain this pattern, and ultimately we decided that the most likely explanation is that people at some point retire, and then they find themselves with half of them with overdraft debt, sometimes quite large amounts, and then they sort of reconsider their financial situation. They constrain themselves. This is why we see spending dropping a lot, and they try to sort of, approach as a better financial health, which we see in the increased savings in their checking and savings accounts. So we definitely think there are a lot of there are work-related expenses that explain part of the drop in income, but we think there's something else. Either people, always underestimate how large the work-related expenses are, and the same with sort of the uncertainty about medical costs and longevity. So there must be something else, because that uncertainty shouldn't discretely change around retirement unless people are systematically negatively surprised or something like that. So what we did in the associated research paper is we ran like a number of additional specification robustness checks to really show that this is a very consistent finding in the data. We also replicated the same finding in other data from the US, both survey consumption data as well as these are like cross-sectional surveys as well as sort of individual level surveys where we can compare people before and after. So this is what we did. We looked at with a new transactions level data set at the question of like which consumption categories fall versus not at the time of retirement. We felt like it might be helpful to look at consumer debt and savings as well. And we found some patterns that we found difficult to explain with sort of the standard models of rational planning. We also found it somewhat difficult to explain with the leading explanation for the existing retirement consumption puzzles, which is why we think there's some more work to be done to fully understand the question whether people are adequately prepared and safe enough for retirement, or whether we want to help them more to achieve that. Thank you so much.